She was the queen who slept with the gods. The woman who turned worship into desire. The name that made heaven bleed. Her lips built empires. Her eyes commanded kings. Her hands shaped idols that promised love and delivered judgment. But power, born of lust, is a fire without mercy. And when heaven's patience burned away, the gods she worshipped came to collect their debt. This is not just her fall, it's every heart that trades truth for pleasure. Would you have resisted her? Or followed her into the flame? Before we begin her story, ask yourself, what would you sacrifice for desire? If this tale stirs you, like, subscribe, and share. It truly means the world to us. Now, let's begin. Picture a city where wealth flows like wine and morality drowns in the Mediterranean Sea. This is Tyre, the jewel of Phoenicia, in the 9th century before Christ. A place so rich, so powerful, so corrupt that its very name would become synonymous with divine judgment. Its obscene wealth came from 3 sources that should make your skin crawl. First, the royal purple that draped every ancient king. Phoenician workers crushed tens of thousands of murex sea snails to extract a secretion that turned fabric the deep crimson of coagulated blood. Mountains of rotting shells piled outside city walls. Archaeologists have found these massive deposits. The color of royalty literally smelled like death. Second, human cargo. Tyre's merchant fleet carried people across the Mediterranean as casually as metal ingots. The prophet Ezekiel condemned them for trading human beings and articles of bronze, treating flesh as commodity. But the third source was the darkest. The Phoenicians worshipped Baal, the storm god who controlled rain and fertility, and Asherah, the fertility goddess represented by carved wooden poles with explicit sexual imagery. Their religion incorporated temple prostitution as sacred practice. Worshippers believed ritual sex would persuade these deities to bless crops and bring rain. An entire theological system where sexual acts were prayers offered to heaven. Archaeological excavations at Phoenician sites have uncovered burial grounds containing thousands of urns filled with cremated infant remains. Whether these were sacrificial offerings to Baal or simply ancient cemeteries remains debated among scholars. But ancient texts, including biblical accounts, consistently accuse the Phoenicians of child sacrifice during times of crisis. This was the world that shaped Jezebel. Her father's story is documented by the ancient historian Josephus. His name was Ethbaal, meaning with Baal. Before becoming king, he served as a priest of Astarte, the Phoenician name for Asherah. Then, according to Josephus, he assassinated the reigning King Pheles and seized the throne. A priest who became king through murder, merging religious and political authority into one position.
Pheles questioned the temples. He withheld offerings, so I removed him and took what Baal had already given me.
This was the man who raised her. We don't have records of her childhood, but we can reconstruct what her upbringing must have been like. As a princess in Tyre, Jezebel would have been educated for diplomatic marriage. Phoenician princesses learned multiple languages for international negotiations. They studied the customs of neighboring kingdoms. They were trained in persuasion and court politics that would make them valuable when married off to seal alliances. But her education was unique because of Ethbaal. She grew up where religious and political power were inseparable. where a ruler could declare something divinely mandated and enforce it with royal authority. She attended religious ceremonies from childhood, not as an observer, but as royalty being groomed. The practices that other cultures found shocking were normalized. This was her religion, her culture, her truth.
Father, the Israelites worship only one God. Just one. How can that be enough?
It's not enough. That's why they're weak. One God means no options, no flexibility, no real power. When you marry, remember, whoever controls the gods controls the kingdom.
Something in her upbringing created not just belief, but zealotry. Not just acceptance, but missionary conviction. By the time she reached a marriageable age, opportunity arrived. King Ahab of Israel needed a powerful ally. Assyria was expanding northward, swallowing smaller kingdoms. Tyre needed access to Israel's agricultural wealth and land routes. A political marriage would strengthen both kingdoms. On parchment, brilliant strategy. In reality, catastrophic. Because Israel worshipped Yahweh, the God who had explicitly commanded his people never to intermarry with nations serving other gods. The concern wasn't racial, it was religious. Foreign wives would bring foreign gods, and foreign gods would corrupt the covenant. The prohibition was ancient, clear, and repeated throughout Israel's law. Ahab ignored it completely. The biblical text specifically notes these prophets ate at Jezebel's table. This was her project, her plan, her mission.
I'm not going to become Israelites. I'm going to show them what real divine power looks like.
Ahab saw a political alliance sealed with marriage. Jezebel saw a kingdom ripe for conversion, a people isolated by their exclusive devotion to an invisible God. She looked at Israel's faithfulness to Yahweh and saw not strength, but vulnerability, not purity, but opportunity. The wedding united two kingdoms, but it also unleashed something no one anticipated. A woman with royal authority, religious conviction, absolute certainty, and 850 priests ready to prove that Baal and Asherah were more powerful than the God of Israel. The foreign princess became the foreign queen, and the foreign queen was about to show Israel what happens when someone who believes with absolute conviction gets absolute power. But first, she needed to break the king. She needed to transform Ahab from Israel's monarch into her puppet. She needed to establish absolute control, and she knew exactly how to do it. She understood something about weak men that has remained true across 3,000 years. They don't need to be convinced. They need to be managed. Within months, the bedroom became her throne room. Pillow talk became policy. Ancient historians would later call her active and bold, falling into what they termed impurity and wickedness. But strip away the moral judgment, and you see a woman who refused to play the submissive foreign wife, a queen who came to conquer, not to compromise.
She asks so little. A place for her prophets to worship, room for her gods alongside mine. How can I deny her this when she's giving me Tyre's alliance?
Ahab thinks I'm compromising by letting him keep Yahweh's temple. He doesn't understand. I don't need to destroy his God. I just need to prove mine is stronger.
Ahab transformed from Israel's monarch into Jezebel's instrument. She moved with calculated speed. The historian Josephus tells us Jezebel personally oversaw construction of temples, planted sacred groves, and appointed hundreds of priests. But archaeology reveals something strategic. Excavations at Samaria, the capital, found no evidence of any Baal temple near the royal palace. After decades of digging, nothing. The evidence points to Jezreel, a secondary royal residence 30 miles north, closer to Mount Carmel. This wasn't random. Building her religious headquarters away from the capital meant avoiding immediate backlash from Yahweh loyalists while consolidating power. She could establish her cult without daily confrontation, then expand once the foundation was solid. The palace itself became her canvas. Phoenician craftsmen covered walls with intricate ivory panels showing scenes from her homeland's mythology. Gods and goddesses carved into surfaces where Israel's government conducted business. She erected Asherah poles throughout the kingdom, wooden monuments carved to represent male genitalia, sometimes tall as trees, planted at worship sites as explicit declarations that sex and spirituality belong together. Within 3 years, Jezebel had built an entire parallel religious infrastructure in the heart of Israel. But the decoration wasn't enough. She wanted theological dominance, and she knew exactly what stood in her way. The prophets of Yahweh crowned kings and dethroned them. They declared wars righteous and condemned royal policies. They interpreted God's will for the masses. As long as these men breathed, they would oppose her, undermine her influence, and turn people against her gods.
They call my rituals abominations. They call Baal a worthless stone. They turn my husband's people against me with every prophecy. So I'm removing them.
Then she ordered them hunted down and killed. Prophets were slaughtered, cut off, eliminated systematically. Not random violence born from rage, but calculated genocide designed to silence opposition. One palace official named Obadiah took enormous personal risk hiding 100 prophets in caves, splitting them into groups of 50, secretly feeding them bread and water. Imagine holy men crouching in darkness, listening for footsteps that might be rescue or murder. Every sound could mean death. Some probably died in those caves, others went mad. The survivors never forgot the terror of months spent underground. The killing campaign created exactly the effect she wanted. Those who survived fled to neighboring kingdoms or stayed hidden, terrified. Even Ahab did nothing to stop his wife's murder spree. And slowly, insidiously, Israel changed. Citizens who once worshipped Yahweh alone now hedged their spiritual bets. They prayed to Yahweh for some blessings and Baal for others. They rationalized that more gods meant more protection. This is how systematic corruption works. Not dramatic conversion, but gradual accommodation until nobody remembers where the boundaries used to be. For 3 years, Jezebel's project seemed unstoppable. She'd eliminated opposition, built infrastructure, and controlled the king. Phoenician religion was establishing itself in Israel's heart. Then one day, a prophet nobody had seen in years walked into Ahab's throne room, wild-eyed, wearing animal skins, smelling of the wilderness. His name was Elijah, and he'd come to declare war.
As the Lord God of Israel lives, before whom I stand, there shall be no dew nor rain these years, except by my word.
He delivered the prophecy and vanished into the wilderness before anyone could stop him. No rain, no dew, not a single drop of moisture until he said otherwise. But here's what made his prophecy so devastating. He wasn't just predicting drought. He was directly challenging Baal's core identity. The storm god's entire purpose was controlling rain and fertility. Phoenician prayers literally begged him to ride the clouds and open the windows of heaven. Every temple Jezebel built, every ritual her priests performed, every promise she made to Israel, all of it rested on Baal's supposed power over weather. Elijah was calling him impotent publicly in front of the king. At first, Ahab probably dismissed it as fanatical ranting, but weeks became months. The sky stayed merciless and clear. Crops withered, livestock collapsed, springs dried to dust, famine spread like plague. This wasn't a natural disaster. This was a divine demonstration. Yahweh was proving his supremacy through absence, showing a nation worshipping the storm god that Baal controlled absolutely nothing. And Jezebel couldn't find the prophet. Ahab sent search parties throughout Israel and into neighboring territories demanding oaths from foreign rulers that they hadn't seen Elijah. The manhunt consumed royal resources and attention, but Elijah remained hidden, miraculously sustained while Israel suffered. The drought lasted 3 brutal years. Everything Jezebel had built began to crumble. Her gods couldn't produce rain. Her priests couldn't break the drought. Her temples offered no relief. The people who'd started worshipping Baal and Asherah began whispering that maybe they'd chosen the wrong side. Her husband grew desperate and erratic, caught between his wife's fury and his people's desperation. By the 3rd year, Jezebel's rage had reached explosive levels.
My prophets pray, they cut themselves, they dance until collapse, and nothing. Baal sent rain in Tyre for 1,000 years. Why is he silent here? Unless their god is actually fighting back.
For the first time since arriving in Israel, doubt flickered. Not in her god's existence, but in her ability to prove their power on foreign ground against a god who seemed to be actively resisting her. The drought was doing what Elijah's prophecies never could. It was making Jezebel question whether she'd underestimated Israel's God. And somewhere in the wilderness, protected by that same God, the wild prophet was waiting for the signal to return. But Elijah's survival during those 3 years wasn't a comfortable exile. It was a test of faith as brutal as the drought itself. God sent him first to the Wadi Cherith, a ravine east of the Jordan. There, in complete isolation, ravens brought him bread and meat twice daily, morning and evening. Think about that image. Scavenging birds, creatures associated with death and uncleanness, became God's delivery service. The prophet who just condemned Israel's king was being fed by animals while the nation starved. He drank from the brook until the brook dried up.
Even the water you provided is gone. I've condemned Israel for drought, and now I'm dying of thirst myself. Where do I go now?
Even God's provision wasn't permanent. The same drought punishing Israel eventually consumed Elijah's water source. The wadi became cracked earth and dust, and then God gave him the strangest command yet. Go to Zarephath, in Phoenicia, in Jezebel's homeland. The irony was deliberate and devastating. God was sending his prophet into enemy territory, into the very region that worshipped Baal, to prove that Yahweh controlled provision even on foreign ground. Baal's powerlessness would be demonstrated in his own country. Elijah found a widow at the city gate gathering sticks. He asked for water, then for bread. Her response revealed how severe the famine had become. As surely as the Lord your God lives, I have no bread, only a handful of flour in a jar and a little oil in a jug. I'm gathering a few sticks to make a final meal for myself and my son, so we may eat it and die. She was preparing their last food before starvation, and Elijah asked her to feed him first. It was a test of faith mirroring what was happening in Israel. Would she trust God's prophet when everything looked hopeless? Would she give from desperation, believing supernatural provision would follow? She did, and God multiplied the flour and oil. For days that stretched into weeks, into months, the jar never emptied. The jug never ran dry. A Phoenician widow experienced Yahweh's provision while Israel, God's own people, suffered under drought. But then her son died, and she turned on Elijah with a raw accusation. "What do you have against me, man of God? Did you come to remind me of my sin and kill my son?" Elijah took the child's body to an upper room and stretched himself over the boy 3 times, crying out to God. The child's life returned. The widow's response became a declaration that would echo through the story. "Now I know that you are a man of God, and that the word of the Lord from your mouth is truth." For 3 years, while Jezebel raged and Israel questioned and Ahab searched desperately, Elijah lived in miraculous provision that proved one undeniable truth. Yahweh controlled life and death, rain and drought, provision and famine, and he was about to demonstrate that supremacy before the entire nation. The showdown was coming to Mount Carmel, a mountain visible from Jezebel's palace in Jezreel, where she'd watched everything she believed get put to the ultimate test. The signal finally came. After 3 years of miraculous provision in enemy territory, God commanded Elijah to return, face Ahab, gather the prophets, end this. Mount Carmel rose at the border where Israel met Phoenicia, a contested ridge where 2 nations and 2 religions collided. Assyrian records from decades later mention a shrine called Baal-i-Rasi on Carmel's summit, the headland of Baal. Elijah wasn't choosing neutral ground. He was calling for a showdown in the storm god's own temple on the mountain where Phoenicians believed their deity commanded lightning and rain. The message went out through Ahab. "Gather all Israel to Mount Carmel. Bring every prophet who eats at Jezebel's table."
Elijah wants all Israel assembled, and he specifically demands Jezebel's prophets, all 850 of them. She's not gonna like this.
These weren't independent holy men surviving on donations. They were government employees with royal salaries, funded by Phoenician gold and Israelite taxes. Jezebel's dinner guests, her theological mercenaries. 850 priests whose loyalty she'd purchased and whose authorities she backed with state power. Thousands climbed the mountain. From her palace at Jezreel, Jezebel could see the dark masses streaming toward Carmel's slopes. Humanity gathering to watch her prophets face the wild man who'd been hiding for 3 years.
Let him come. Let him call fire from his invisible God. My prophets have Baal himself, the storm god, the Lord of lightning. This ends today.
Elijah stood before the assembled nation and asked the question that sliced through every compromise. How long will you waver between 2 opinions? If Yahweh is God, follow him. If Baal is God, follow him. The people said nothing. That silence was its own confession. They'd been playing both sides, treating gods like insurance policies you collect in case one fails. The terms were brutally simple. 2 bulls, 2 altars. The prophets of Baal would call their god. Elijah would call Yahweh. Whichever deity sent fire to consume the sacrifice was real. No philosophy, no debate, just raw demonstration. Baal's prophets chose their bull and prepared it. Morning sunlight warmed the mountain as they began dancing around the altar, chanting the storm god's name, invoking the deity who supposedly controlled lightning itself. Hours passed. Nothing. By noon, sweat soaked their robes and voices cracked from shouting. That's when Elijah started mocking them. "Call louder. Maybe he's deep in thought. Maybe he's busy. Maybe he's traveling. Or maybe he's sleeping and needs to be woken up." In ancient Near Eastern culture, suggesting a god needed awakening implied he was weak, impotent, not truly divine. Elijah was publicly destroying everything these prophets represented. They responded the only way desperation allows. They grabbed swords and spears and began cutting their own flesh. Blood streamed down arms, chests, legs. This was imitative magic. They believed releasing their life essence would force Baal to release rain. When prayers go unanswered and rituals fail, believers escalate. They cut deeper, shout louder, try harder. The silence from heaven becomes unbearable, so they fill it with their own suffering. The prophets bled through the afternoon, prophesying in ecstatic trances. Evening approached. Still nothing, no voice, no answer. Baal remained utterly, devastatingly absent. Now Elijah stepped forward. He called the people close and began repairing a Yahweh altar that had been torn down, evidence that Jezebel's religious revolution hadn't introduced something new. It had buried something ancient. He used 12 stones, one for each tribe. This was about national identity as much as divine power. Then he arranged wood, placed the sacrifice, and did something that seemed insane. He ordered servants to drench everything with water. Not once. 3 times they poured it over sacrifice. Wood, stones, water pooled in a trench around the altar. Starting fire under these conditions would be humanly impossible, which was precisely the point. Evening came. Elijah prayed. No hours-long ritual, no self-mutilation, no ecstatic dancing.
Lord God of Abraham, Isaac, and Israel, let it be known today that you are God in Israel, and I am your servant. Answer me so these people will know that you are turning their hearts back.
Fire fell from heaven. Not a spark, not a gradual flame. Consuming supernatural fire that devoured the sacrifice, burned the wood, melted the stones, vaporized the dust, and licked up every drop of water. The heat, the roar, the sudden obliteration of everything on that altar. It must have been terrifying. The crowd fell screaming. Yahweh is God. Yahweh is God. 3 years of Jezebel's temple building, prophet sponsoring, religious reformation, all of it collapsed in one moment of divine fire. Elijah gave the order with cold precision. Seize the prophets of Baal. Don't let one escape. The people obeyed. They grabbed the 450 men who'd cut themselves bloody for a god who never answered and dragged them down the mountain to the Kishon Valley. There in that ravine, throats were cut, bodies fell. The brook ran red. This was retribution matching genocide with genocide. These men had been part of the system that murdered Yahweh's prophets. Now they paid the same price. Clouds gathered. After 3 years of merciless drought, thunder rolled. Rain poured down in sheets, soaking parched ground, filling streams, breaking the famine. Elijah told Ahab to hurry down the mountain before the rain made the roads impassable. Ahab rode through the palace gates. Inside, the king found his wife and told her everything. The fire, the massacre, the rain, all of it.
They're all dead. Every prophet. Elijah called fire from heaven.
And the people.
They turned on her. Then the rain came, just like he said it would.
Jezebel's face didn't change. She called for a messenger.
Find Elijah. Tell him this exactly. May the gods strike me dead. If by this time tomorrow he isn't as dead as my prophets, every single one of them.
The messenger went out and found Elijah still at the city entrance. He delivered the queen's message word for word. No acknowledgement that maybe, possibly, she'd been wrong about which god controlled the weather. No fear, just pure rage wrapped in absolute defiance. The massacre on Carmel hadn't broken her. It had only made her more dangerous, and Elijah heard that message and ran for his life. But Jezebel's next battlefield wouldn't be a mountain, it would be a vineyard. And this time, the victim would be one innocent man whose only crime was refusing to sell his ancestral land. And in that vineyard, in that seemingly small act of royal theft and judicial murder, Jezebel would seal not just her own fate, but the fate of her entire bloodline. The vineyard sat next to the royal palace in Jezreel. Modest, perfectly positioned, belonging to a man named Naboth. Ahab offered to buy it. Fair price. Better land elsewhere. Naboth refused. The Lord forbid that I should give you the inheritance of my fathers. Under Israelite law, ancestral land was permanent family property. Selling it would betray generations. Naboth wasn't being stubborn, he was being faithful. Ahab went home, got in bed, turned his face to the wall, and refused to eat. Jezebel found him there.
Is this how the king of Israel acts? Get up, eat. I'll get you the vineyard.
She grabbed his royal seal and wrote letters to the elders of Naboth's city. Proclaim a public fast, seat Naboth prominently, have 2 men accuse him of cursing God and the king. Under Israelite law, 2 witnesses meant certain conviction. Jezebel was weaponizing their own justice system, turning protection into execution. The elders obeyed. The community assembled. 2 men stood and made their accusation. They dragged Naboth outside the city walls and stoned him. Rocks striking flesh, breaking bones, crushing him slowly under assault from his own neighbors. His sons died with him, ensuring no heir could claim the property. An innocent family erased through corrupted law.
Get up and take possession. Naboth's not alive anymore.
Ahab walked to his new property, probably stepping over dried blood at the gate. Then Elijah appeared. The prophet had been hiding since Jezebel's death threat after Mount Carmel. But God sent him back for the king standing in ground watered with innocent blood.
Have you murdered and also taken possession? This is what the Lord says. In the place where dogs licked Naboth's blood, dogs will lick up yours. Dogs will devour Jezebel by the wall of Jezreel. Anyone from your family who dies in the city, dogs will eat. Anyone who dies in the country, birds will feed on.
No burial, no rest with ancestors. Bodies torn apart by scavenging animals, the ultimate disgrace. This wasn't a threat. This was prophecy. God's judgment spoken through his prophet.
You have sold yourself to do evil, urged on by Jezebel. I will bring disaster on you and cut off every last male from your house.
Ahab actually repented. He tore his clothes, wore a sackcloth, and fasted. God postponed the disaster to his son's generation. Jezebel never repented. The vineyard belonged to the crown. Naboth's family was gone. She'd bent the system to her will exactly as she'd done in Tyre. But that prophecy about dogs in Jezreel hung in the air like smoke, patient and inevitable. The queen who murdered for a garden was about to discover that some debts get paid with interest. 20 years passed between the prophecy and its fulfillment. Ahab died first, exactly as Elijah had declared. His blood washed from a chariot while dogs gathered at the pool. The military commander named Jehu received divine authorization to finish what had been pronounced 2 decades earlier in a stolen vineyard. He rode toward Jezreel to find Jezebel. She'd ruled Israel for more than 30 years, outlasted prophets, survived wars, and controlled kings. She was probably in her 60s or 70s by now, old by ancient standards, but still formidable, still sharp, and she had only minutes to decide how she would meet the end.
Bring my cosmetics, my finest robes. If death comes today, it will find me as a queen.
For 3,000 years, people have debated why she painted her face in those final moments. She chose presentation over protection, image over escape. In her final moments, Jezebel was still playing the game of power. The sound of Jehu's chariot thundered through the city gates. She heard it all from her window and watched him arrive in the courtyard below. Then Jezebel called him Zimri.
Have you come in peace, Zimri, you murderer of your master?
Who is Zimri in this context? Zimri had been a military commander who assassinated King Elah and seized the throne of Israel. He ruled for exactly 7 days before another commander killed him. By calling Jehu Zimri, Jezebel was prophesying his failure, predicting that his revolution would collapse within a week, just as Zimri's had. But Jehu didn't respond to her at all. He came near her and shouted to whoever was standing in the shadows behind the queen, "Who is on my side?" Who? Palace servants appeared behind Jezebel, and when Jehu gave the order, they didn't hesitate. They grabbed her. The queen who had commanded them for decades became suddenly weightless in their hands, and they hurled her from the window. She fell through open air toward the street below. Her body struck the pavement with the sound of breaking. Blood splattered against the palace wall in streaks of red. Blood sprayed across the legs of horses and the wheels of Jehu's chariot. The queen who had controlled kings lay shattered on the ground. Then Jehu said that someone should bury that cursed woman. She was, after all, a king's daughter. But when the servants went out to collect her body, they found almost nothing left to bury. The dogs had been faster. Only her skull remained. Everything else had been consumed by scavenging animals in the street while Jehu ate his meal inside. And suddenly, someone remembered. Someone quoted the words Elijah had spoken in Naboth's vineyard. "Dogs will devour Jezebel by the wall of Jezreel. Her body will be like dung on the ground so that no one will be able to say, 'This is Jezebel.'" Every word of the prophecy had come true with grotesque precision. All of it. But the story doesn't end with her death, because her name refused to die with her body. From that moment forward, Jezebel became a weapon that would be used for millennia. Throughout history, powerful women who refused to submit, who exercised authority, who challenged male power structures. They were called Jezebel. The queen's name survived not as honor, but as accusation, not as legacy, but as warning. But perhaps the real lesson isn't about whether Jezebel was a villain or victim. Perhaps it's about what happens when absolute conviction meets absolute power. The most dangerous people in history aren't those who know they're doing evil. They're those who are absolutely convinced they're doing good. Her story, stripped of all the theological interpretation and ancient politics, leaves us with lessons that echo across 3,000 years. First, certainty without doubt is dangerous. When you're so convinced you're right that you stop questioning, you become capable of anything. Jezebel never doubted her gods or her methods, and that made her ruthless. Second, power without accountability corrupts. Jezebel could forge documents, orchestrate murders, corrupt courts, and face no consequences. When authority answers to no one, justice becomes whatever serves the powerful. Third, The ends don't justify the means. Jezebel may have genuinely believed she was helping Israel, but murder in service of sincere belief is still murder. Noble goals pursued through corrupt methods produce only corruption. Fourth, prophecy fulfilled with precision demands attention. Dogs, Jezreel, unrecognizable, exactly as spoken, exactly as fulfilled decades later. Whether divine or coincidence, justice remembered every victim and waited 20 years to collect. Her story doesn't offer easy answers, but 3,000 years later it still asks, what are you certain about? What would you do with power? How do you treat those who are different? Do your methods match your goals? And do you believe justice eventually comes? That's all for now. The fire has faded. The queen has fallen. But her story still burns in every heart that once mistook desire for love. If this story made you feel, think, or look at the heavens differently, give it a like, subscribe, and share it, because that truly means the world to us. Thank you for watching. Thank you for believing in these stories that still breathe between light and shadow. Until next time, and may truth always find you.